What if I told you that the greatest empire the world has ever seen wasn't born in glory, but in blood, betrayal, and a brother's murder? It began with twins, Romulus and Remus, left to die in the river, raised by a she-wolf, and destined to change the world. One would build a city, the other would die by his hand. From that one act of violence, Rome was born, a village on 7 hills that would rise to rule the earth. But it didn't start as an empire. First, it was a kingdom, then a republic, then something far more dangerous. You'll see how the republic rose, with law, order, and ambition, and how slowly it rotted from within, rich against poor, senators against soldiers, and freedom against fear. You'll walk beside Julius Caesar, the man who ended the republic with a smile. You'll stand in the Senate when the daggers fall, and see how one death birthed an empire. Witness the rise of emperors: Augustus, Nero, Trajan, Marcus Aurelius. Some ruled with vision, others with madness, and all of them sat beneath a crown, heavy with the weight of blood. You'll see Rome at its height, roads stretching to the edge of the world, aqueducts flowing like rivers of life, and then cracks in the marble, plague, rebellion, invasion. One by one, the gods abandoned her. The empire splits, the west crumbles, and the east becomes Byzantium. But even in death, Rome refuses to vanish. The echoes of Rome are everywhere, in our languages, our laws, even in how we dream of power. This isn't just history, it's the blueprint of civilization. So if you think Rome was only emperors and battles, think again. This is the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, and it's more brutal, more brilliant, and more eternal than you've ever imagined. Subscribe if you haven't already, and settle in, because this is the story of the empire that refused to die.
The Persians come to make slaves of us all. I have a better idea. I say we drench the gods with their blood!
From a river and a myth to the rise of kings. In the stillness before history, there was only the land and the river. A winding river, a quiet current, trees on both sides, shadows moving gently in the wind, and then a story, a beginning, a myth that would echo across centuries. It begins with 2 children. According to Roman tradition, the twins Romulus and Remus were born to a woman named Rhea Silvia. She was a priestess. She served the goddess Vesta. Her life was meant to be one of purity, of silence, of ritual. But she bore children, sons, twins. Their father, it was said, was Mars, the god of war. A king, fearing the blood in their veins, gave an order. The twins were to be drowned. The river would take them. The river would end the line. But the river Tiber did not take them. The water flowed. The basket floated. The twins survived. The current carried them downstream, past reeds, past birds, past trees bending over the banks. And there, near the edge of the forest, a she-wolf appeared. She found the infants. She did not harm them. She lay beside them. She fed them with her milk. She warmed them with her body. She became their first protector. Later, a shepherd named Faustulus discovered them. He brought them home. He and his wife raised the boys. They grew up among the hills, among the herds, among the open skies of Latium. As the boys grew, they learned of their origins. They were not ordinary. They were descendants of kings, and they were destined to found a city. They chose a place along the river, the place where the she-wolf had found them. But the brothers disagreed. They argued. They quarreled. And then one fell. Romulus struck Remus down. The act was final. One brother lived. One brother died. And so Romulus became the founder of the city, the first Roman. He took a plow. He drew a boundary around the chosen hill, the Palatine. He marked the sacred line. He raised walls. He began a settlement. The year was 753 before the Common Era. Romans would one day count their time from this moment. It was a beginning. The first city was simple. Small huts, thatched roofs, wooden fences, paths of dirt winding through the trees. The river moved nearby, slow and steady. The hills stood around the settlement, each one watching silently. To the north, there were Etruscan cities, strong and organized. To the south, Greek colonies, wealthy and wise. But Rome was neither. Not yet. Romulus ruled alone. He welcomed outcasts, wanderers, exiles. He gave shelter to the rejected, the unwanted, the forgotten. But the new city faced a problem. There were few women. To grow, the city needed families. To create families, it needed women. Romulus sent envoys to nearby communities. He asked for marriage alliances. The answer was no, so Romulus planned a festival. He invited the neighboring Sabines. He welcomed them warmly. They came in peace. They brought their daughters. And during the celebration, the Roman men seized them. The event became known as the Rape of the Sabine Women, not in the modern sense of the word, but as an abduction, a forced union. The Sabines were furious. They prepared for war. But the women, now wives, now mothers, intervened. They stood between the two armies. They asked for peace. They pleaded for unity. And so the peoples merged. Rome became stronger. After Romulus, more kings followed. 7 in total, each one different, each one leaving a mark. First came Romulus. Then came Numa Pompilius. Numa was not a warrior. He was quiet, thoughtful. He brought religion. He brought structure. He taught the Romans how to honor the gods. He created rituals. He founded temples. He established the office of Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome. He built the Temple of Janus. Its doors were symbols, open in war, closed in peace. Throughout Rome's history, those doors would rarely remain shut. Numa gave Rome time to breathe. Then came Tullus Hostilius. He was the opposite of Numa. He embraced war. He revived the martial spirit of Romulus. He led Rome into conflict with Alba Longa, another Latin city. To avoid a full war, champions were chosen. The Horatii for Rome, the Curiatii for Alba, triplets on both sides. They fought as representatives. Only one Horatius survived, but Rome won. Later, Tullus destroyed Alba Longa. He brought its people to Rome. He added their strength to his own. Rome grew. Next came Ancus Marcius. He was both religious and military, a balance between Numa and Tullus. He built the first bridge across the Tiber, the Pons Sublicius. He founded Ostia, a port city near the mouth of the river. With access to the sea, Rome began to trade. Salt, fish, grain. Goods passed through Ostia and into the heart of Latium. Ancus also added the Janiculum Hill to the city. He built walls. He expanded the boundaries. The city stretched outward. The population increased. Then came Lucius Tarquinius Priscus. He was not born Roman. He was Etruscan by origin, but he became king. He brought Etruscan customs, Etruscan architecture, Etruscan vision. He began great projects, the Circus Maximus for races, the Cloaca Maxima for drainage, and the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. He began to shape Rome into a city of stone. After him came Servius Tullius. Servius was said to be born a slave, but he rose to power. He ruled with reforms. He divided the people into classes based on wealth and age. He created a new political body, the Centuriate Assembly. It was organized by military function and property. He built a defensive wall around the city, the first to encircle all 7 hills: Palatine, Aventine, Capitoline, Quirinal, Viminal, Esquiline, Celian. 7 hills, 1 city. He gave Rome its first census, its first system of representation, its first sense of identity as more than a tribe, as a people. Then came the final king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. He ruled with arrogance. He silenced the Senate. He ignored tradition. He ruled without counsel. But it was not he who caused the fall. It was his son. Sextus Tarquinius desired a noblewoman named Lucretia. She refused him. He forced her. She told her family. Then she took her own life. The Romans were outraged. Her death sparked rebellion. Her name became a symbol. A man named Lucius Junius Brutus, her kinsman, led the revolt. The king was overthrown. The monarchy was ended. It was the year 509 BCE. The kings were gone. A new form of government began. The Roman Republic was born. And so the Age of Kings came to a close. From Romulus to Tarquin, each ruler had shaped the city. From myth to ritual, from war to law, from wooden huts to stone temples, from the banks of the Tiber to the walls around 7 hills. Rome had grown. It had changed. It had endured. And yet it was still young. The Roman people had begun to organize themselves, not around a king, but around a senate, around offices, around laws. The Republic would be different. There would be consuls. There would be magistrates. There would be rules to limit power. There would be votes. It was an experiment, one that would last for centuries. Roman life was structured. At the center was the family. The paterfamilias, the male head, held power. His authority was law. Religion was constant. Every act had a ritual. Every offering had a purpose. The gods were many. The festivals were frequent. The Pax Deorum, the peace with the gods, was essential. They prayed. They sacrificed. They watched for signs. And in return, they believed the gods would protect the city. By the end of the monarchy, Rome had become more than a village. Paths had become streets. Huts had become homes. Hills had become districts. The population may have reached 30 or 35,000. A modest number, but large for its time. Trade flowed through Ostia. Goods came from the land and the sea. People came from nearby towns. Some stayed. Some became Roman. The city had become a place of merging cultures, ideas, customs. Rome was learning to adapt. It had taken from the Etruscans their arches, their symbols, their kings. It had taken from the Greeks their gods, their stories, their colonies to the south. But it remained itself. Rome was not yet an empire, not yet a power, but it had found its rhythm, its structure, its voice. And as one age ended, another began. 7 kings, 7 hills, 1 river, 1 city, born of myth, shaped by rule, protected by gods, strengthened by its people. Rome had survived its first test, the test of foundation, and now it stood at the edge of something new. The Republic awaited. This was only the beginning. You've just taken your first step into the ancient world of Rome. There's so much more ahead. Emperors, betrayals, and the fall of a civilization. If you're enjoying the journey, tap that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps me keep making videos like this. And in the comments, tell me where in the world you're watching from. I'd love to know where our Roman journey is reaching. After the kings were gone, the city remained. The hills stood in silence. The Tiber flowed, slowly, endlessly. On the Palatine, the wind brushed the earth where a plow had once drawn a boundary. Rome had survived its first transformation. No more kings, no more crowns. In their place, something different, something uncertain. The Republic, a system built not on a single voice, but on many. A city no longer ruled by bloodline, but by law. 2 consuls replaced 1 king. Each held power for 1 year. Each could overrule the other. It was balance, not dominance. It was meant to protect the city from tyranny. A senate remained, a council of elders, once advisors to kings. Now they shaped decisions, not with orders but with persuasion. And the people, they too had a voice. Assemblies were formed. Citizens gathered. Laws were proposed. Votes were cast. Slowly, carefully. It was not perfect. It was not equal. But it was Rome's second beginning. Outside the city, the world shifted. Neighboring tribes watched Rome with wary eyes. The Etruscans still held power to the north. Latin towns dotted the landscape. The Samnites lived in the hills. and beyond them Gauls, Greeks, Carthaginians. All would, in time, meet the Republic. But first, Rome had to survive itself. There were divisions, deep ones. Two classes defined early Rome: the patricians and the plebeians. Patricians claimed noble birth. They held the priesthoods, the consulships, the keys to power. Plebeians were the many: farmers, artisans, soldiers. They paid taxes. They fought in wars. But they lacked representation. Tension grew. Protests began. In time, change came. Tribunes were created, elected by the people for the people. Their task: to protect plebeians from injustice. Their power, the veto. It was a whisper of balance, a slow evolution, and still Rome endured. The city expanded, not all at once, but step by step. There were wars, many of them. The Latin League resisted. The Samnites challenged. The Gauls sacked the city. But Rome rebuilt, each time stronger, each time more disciplined, each time more Roman. With victory came transformation. Roads were built, straight, purposeful, leading out from the city like veins. Colonies were planted. Latin became a shared tongue. Citizenship, once sacred, limited, was slowly extended. Rights were offered. Duties were shared. Rome became more than a city. It became an idea. And then came Carthage. Across the sea, another power rose. Wealthy, naval, mercantile. The Punic Wars began. Hannibal crossed the Alps. Elephants trudged through snow. Roman legions fell, regrouped, and rose again. It was a struggle that spanned generations. And when it ended, Rome had changed. Carthage was gone. The Republic victorious. But with victory came consequences. Rome now ruled far more than Italy, Spain, North Africa, Greece. But conquest brought wealth and inequality. Noble families grew richer. Poor citizens lost land. Slavery increased. Veterans returned to find their farms taken. Old systems strained. New tensions rose. Reformers emerged. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius. They spoke of land, of fairness, of the people, and for it they died. The Republic had laws, but power was shifting. Generals rose not just as soldiers but as politicians. Marius reformed the army. Soldiers now served the man, not just the state. Sulla marched on Rome itself. The unthinkable had become reality. Rome fought wars abroad, and civil wars at home. And yet, in the chaos, brilliance emerged. Cicero spoke with clarity. Cato stood with integrity. And a young man named Julius Caesar watched it all. Caesar climbed the ladder. He governed Spain. He allied with Crassus and Pompey. Together they ruled as three. Then Caesar went to Gaul. He fought for years. He wrote of his victories. He became a hero. And then he returned with an army. The Republic trembled. Pompey opposed him. The Senate panicked. Caesar crossed the Rubicon, a line drawn in water, a decision that could not be undone. War followed. Rome chose sides. In time, Caesar stood alone. He was named dictator for life. He enacted reforms. He pardoned enemies. He dreamed of further conquests. But not all dreams are shared. In the Senate, knives were drawn. On the Ides of March, Caesar fell. Rome wept. Rome split. His death did not restore the Republic. It fractured it further. Antony, Octavian, Lepidus, another alliance, another war, and in the end, Octavian remained. The Senate gave him a new name, Augustus. The Republic had ended, not in law, but in spirit. What began with balance, ended with power. Yet, for nearly 500 years, the Roman Republic stood. It debated, it reformed, conquered, it endured. Its legacy in law, in language, in government would echo far beyond its time. And now, as the Republic fades into history, a new age begins. The age of emperors, the age of empire, the age of Rome, eternal. A new name echoed through the marble halls of Rome. Augustus, not a king, Not a tyrant, but something new. Princeps, first citizen, imperator, restorer of peace. The republic was gone in all but name. In its place, the empire began. The Senate remained, the laws endured, but true power now rested in one man. Augustus held many titles, none absolute, but together they formed a quiet dominance. He commanded the legions, controlled the treasury, appointed governors, guided the laws, and all of it with care. He called it the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. It was not peace without armies. It was peace through strength, through order, through unity. Rome settled, Rome prospered. Temples rose, tall and gleaming, made of marble and prayer. Roads stretched farther, linking provinces like threads in a vast tapestry. Aqueducts brought water to thirsty cities. Fountains bubbled softly in public squares. The empire grew quiet, and in that stillness, it expanded. From Spain to Syria, from the Nile to the Rhine, from the black forests of Germania to the windswept moors of Britannia, provinces joined, some by conquest, some by diplomacy, some by hope. Roman law replaced local rule. Latin mixed with native tongues. Coins bore the emperor's face. A common world began to form. In the streets, markets bustled with sound and scent. Spices from Africa, silks from the east, fish from the Tiber. In amphitheaters, crowds cheered as chariots thundered past. In forums, voices debated laws, trade, and stories from distant frontiers. And always the presence of Rome, not just in walls and stones, but in customs, in rituals, in rhythm. The empire was more than land. It was life. Augustus ruled for decades. He reformed the military, the provinces, the finances. He made taxes predictable, census regular. He reshaped the city with monuments to peace and order. He died at peace at the age of 75. His body was laid to rest in a grand mausoleum. His image carved in marble. His legacy embedded in time. Others would follow, some with wisdom, others with cruelty, but all would wear the same purple. The empire continued. Tiberius came next, his stepson. He was cautious, intelligent, and increasingly reclusive. He ruled with suspicion, with silence. The Senate shrank in power. The emperor's word grew. He retired to the island of Capri. From there, he governed through letters and fear. Then came Caligula, young, adored, and unstable. First he was welcomed, then he changed. He spent freely, declared himself divine, pointed his horse to public office. His reign became a spectacle, both theatrical and terrifying. His end was sudden. The Praetorian Guard turned against him. And then they raised Claudius. Claudius was unexpected, awkward, often mocked, but he was capable. He expanded the empire. He brought Britain into Roman hands. He built roads, aqueducts, and canals. He improved the civil service. He wrote histories, though few believed he would write any of his own. He ruled with steady hands until he died, likely poisoned. Then came Nero. At first, he pleased the people with games and gifts. He performed music. He loved the stage. He toured the provinces. But the shadows grew. He executed his mother. He silenced critics. Rome burned, and as flames devoured the city, Nero sang. When rebellion came, he fled. And when the soldiers approached, he ended his life. The Julio-Claudian line was finished. Rome paused, then erupted. The year of the 4 emperors began. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, Vespasian. One by one they rose. One by one they fell, until Vespasian held firm. He restored order, began construction of the Colosseum, brought dignity to the office. He ruled with stability and humor. His sons would follow. Titus opened the arena. He gave aid after disasters, the eruption of Vesuvius, the fire in Rome. He died young, much mourned. Domitian ruled longer. He built extensively. He protected the empire's borders. But he ruled with fear, with spies, with executions. He called himself Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. He was assassinated, his name condemned. Then, a new age, the 5 good emperors. Nerva brought peace and reconciliation. Trajan brought conquest. Under him, the empire reached its greatest size. He built bridges, markets, and forums. His column still stands. Hadrian brought consolidation. He traveled more than any emperor. He built Hadrian's Wall in Britannia. He studied law, loved Greek culture, ruled with thought. Antoninus Pius ruled quietly. Rome was peaceful, prosperous, stable. Marcus Aurelius ruled during hardship. Plagues swept the land. Borders were attacked. But he wrote. His meditations reflect a mind both weary and wise. He believed in duty, in reason, in the stoic calm of leadership. He was a philosopher king. Rome in this era was at its peak. Its borders stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates, from the forests of Germania to the deserts of Arabia. Its cities were vibrant: Alexandria, Carthage, Antioch, Ephesus, Londinium. Its people diverse: traders, soldiers, scholars, slaves, united by law, by language, by the empire. Its roads thousands of miles paved and patrolled. Its navy, dominant across the Mediterranean. It was not just the center of the world. It was the world. But in all golden ages, shadows gather. Corruption simmered beneath the marble. Class divides widened. The Senate became ceremonial. The army loyal to generals, not the state. The provinces restless. And on the frontiers, pressure built. Marcus Aurelius fought to hold the line. He battled in the north. He campaigned in harsh winters. He raised his son Commodus to follow. But as he died, so too did the age of reason. The transition would not be smooth. Rome's next century would be one of storms. But for now, the light still shone. Columns stood tall. Statues watched silently. Banners fluttered. Forums hummed. And beneath it all, a memory lingered. Of a wolf, a river, a boy with a plow. Rome had grown, from hut to city, from city to empire. And still it moved, ever forward, toward glory, toward decline, toward legacy. The light that once bathed Rome began to dim. The columns still stood. The roads still stretched. The banners still fluttered. But beneath it all, something had shifted. The long peace, fragile and fading, gave way to storms. It began with a son, Commodus, heir to Marcus Aurelius, not a philosopher, not a statesman, not a soldier. He ruled as a performer, as a god, as a gladiator. He fought in the arena. He taxed the Senate. He renamed Rome after himself. Once, emperors built walls, roads, laws. Now they built statues of themselves. The people grew restless. The Senate trembled. And the Praetorian Guard, meant to protect the emperor, began plotting in shadows. Commodus was killed in secret, strangled by a wrestler in a quiet chamber. The empire passed briefly to Pertinax, a wise and disciplined man. But the Praetorian Guard, drunk on power, auctioned the empire to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus paid in gold. But loyalty bought in coin does not last. He ruled for just 9 weeks before falling to the sword. The provinces did not wait. 3 generals, 3 armies rose to claim Rome. Septimius Severus, from Africa. Pescennius Niger, from Syria. Clodius Albinus, from Britain. Each bore banners. Each claimed loyalty. Each marched toward the capital. Rome became a battlefield. Severus prevailed. He crushed his rivals. He marched through the city gates not as a savior, but as a conqueror. He dismissed the Senate's authority. He empowered the army. Enrich the soldiers, he said. Despise all others. And so began a new kind of rule. Severus ruled with iron. He fought in Parthia. He campaigned in Africa. He reached the far north of Britannia. There, on the misty frontier, he saw a world slipping from Roman hands. He died in York, far from Rome. His final words were bitter. Keep the peace. Pay the army. Forget the rest. His sons, Caracalla and Geta, inherited the throne. They did not share it. Caracalla murdered Geta in their mother's arms. Blood stained the palace. He then ruled alone. He widened Roman citizenship to all free men in the empire. A bold gesture or a fiscal trick to increase tax revenue. He built great baths. He fought restless tribes. He styled himself as a new Alexander. But paranoia consumed him. He too fell by the sword, betrayed by his own guards. Then came Macrinus, then Elagabalus, then Severus Alexander. Emperors rose, emperors fell. Some ruled for years, others for months. Each left behind statues, coins, and often more ruin. The empire trembled. The frontiers grew dangerous. In the north, Germanic tribes surged across the rivers. In the east, a new enemy emerged, the Sassanids of Persia. Organized, ambitious, ruthless, they shattered Roman legions. They seized cities. The old eastern frontier, once held for centuries, was under siege. Rome's borders, once secure, now bled. Inside the empire, rot spread. The economy crumbled. Coins were debased. Silver disappeared. Inflation soared. Wages lost meaning. Trade slowed. Farms were abandoned. Cities shrank. Populations fled the towns for the countryside. Plagues returned. Whole villages vanished. Faith faltered. The old gods felt distant. Mystery cults spread in whispers. Amid this chaos, one name after another flashed across history. Between 235 and 284 CE, more than 20 emperors claimed the throne. Most died violently. Some were killed by soldiers, others by rivals, few by natural causes. This was the crisis of the 3rd century, an empire without stability, without direction, but not without courage. In distant provinces, survival demanded action. In the east, the city of Palmyra rose. At its helm, Queen Zenobia, brilliant, charismatic, defiant. She claimed control over Syria, Egypt, and parts of Asia Minor. She minted coins in her name. She wore a diadem. She faced Rome. Her reign was brief but dazzling. She dared to dream of independence. But Rome struck back. The Emperor Aurelian rose from the ranks. He was a soldier, a reformer, a savior. In swift campaigns, he crushed the Palmyrene revolt. He then turned west to the Gallic Empire, a breakaway Roman region including Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain. He defeated them, reunited the fragments. He earned a title, Restitutor Orbis, Restorer of the World. He built the Aurelian walls around Rome, vast, thick, enduring. Rome, he said, must be defended. But his reign ended like so many others. He was murdered by his own officers, victim of rumor and fear. The years passed. Emperors flickered like candle flames. Rome remained but changed. Culture shifted. Temples emptied. Statues gathered dust. People turned inward, toward new faiths. From Persia came Mithraism, a cult of light, duty, and initiation. From Egypt, the worship of Isis, the mother goddess. And from Judea, something else. Christianity, once small, now growing, persecuted, yet spreading, promised salvation, hope, life beyond Rome. The emperors feared it, fought it, but could not stop it. The future whispered from its pages. As the empire cracked, it still breathed. In garrisons, soldiers stood watch. In cities, magistrates held court. In markets, merchants weighed coins. The system strained but endured, because Rome was not just a place. It was habit. It was order. It was tradition. Even in its weakness, it held on. Toward the end of this long-shadowed age, a man rose quietly. Diocletian, born in obscurity, raised in hardship. He watched. He learned. And when the time came, he took power. He did not promise peace. He promised change. He would not just rule. He would reform. He would divide, multiply, reorganize. The empire would not collapse. Not yet, but it would become something new. And so the 3rd century closed, with cities still standing, with armies still marching, with emperors still rising. But the age of golden harmony was gone. In its place, survival and transformation. Rome had met its storm, and through it all, it remained silent, waiting for what came next. The Roman Empire had endured, but it no longer felt whole. For centuries it had stretched wide, across deserts and forests, rivers and seas. But now the center wavered, and the edges began to tremble. Too vast, too complex, too many enemies, too many emperors. In the late 3rd century, the empire had known crisis, civil wars, invasions, a plague that emptied towns and blackened fields. Emperors rose and fell like tides, one after another, year by year. Some ruled for months, some for days. Then came one who stayed. His name was Diocletian, a soldier from the eastern provinces, not born of noble blood, not raised in marble halls, but disciplined, cold, and deeply practical. He saw what Rome had become, and he chose not to repair the old. He would build something new. He did not dream of glory. He dreamed of control. Diocletian divided the burden. The empire would no longer rest on one man's shoulders. He created something different, something Rome had never seen. 2 emperors, each with a junior emperor beside him. For rulers, for capitals, 1 empire, the Tetrarchy. In the west, 1 Augustus ruled from Gaul. In the east, another from Nicomedia. Caesars beneath them, ready to rise when the time came. A cycle, a system, plan. It was no longer Rome's world. It was an empire of many names, many regions, many rulers. But it worked. For a time. Diocletian governed with detail. He restructured the provinces smaller, more manageable. He built layers of bureaucracy. He reformed taxes, harsh but orderly. The army, too, was split and spread. Border forces stood watch. Mobile legions waited in reserve. The empire was a machine now, rigid, complex, efficient. He even fixed prices, trying to slow inflation. He issued edicts. He punished dissent. And then, when the empire stood quiet, he did something no emperor had done before. He stepped down, voluntarily, without war, without death. He left the palace. He walked away. He went to the coast of Illyria, and there, in a quiet villa, he tended his garden. The empire remained, divided, structured, disciplined, but something had shifted. One man had controlled the world, and let it go. The age of absolute emperors had begun to change. Yet peace, as always in Rome, would not last. Shadows gather, and a new power begins to rise, one born of battle and marked by a sign. The empire remained divided, east and west, 2 rulers, 2 courts, and for a while it held, balanced, tense but still. Then came death, then came ambition, then came war. Out of the chaos a name emerged, quiet at first, then louder. Constantine, son of a Western Caesar, raised near the frontiers, trained for command. When his father died, the soldiers called out. They named him emperor, not by law, not by vote, but by loyalty and need. Others disagreed. The Tetrarchy fractured. Lines of power split. Rivals rose. All claimed the right to rule. And so the war began. For years, the empire watched itself unravel. East against west, Augustus against Augustus, city against city, and in the center, Constantine. He marched across the lands, through Gaul, into Italy, toward Rome. One final battle remained, the gates of power, the city of emperors. There, on the banks of the Tiber River, he faced his greatest rival. The night before battle, Constantine looked to the sky, and as the story goes, he saw a sign, a cross, a message. In this sign, conquer. At Milvian Bridge, the armies clashed. The sun rose through fog. Shields struck shields. The river turned red. Constantine won. His rival fell. The gates opened. Rome bowed. Now he stood alone. The West was his, but Constantine saw beyond it. He saw something new, the faith rising, people once hidden now growing. He remembered the sign. In the years that followed, Constantine changed the empire. He legalized Christianity, not with violence, but with a law. No longer would the faithful hide in catacombs. No longer would altars burn in secret. Temples still stood. Old gods still lingered. But a shift had begun. Churches rose. Bishops gained power. And faith became part of the state. And Constantine built a city, not in Rome, but in the east, on the edge of land and sea, where Europe meets Asia. He raised a new capital, Constantinople, a city of marble and domes, a city of law and light, a city to outlast empires. He called it New Rome, and there he ruled. But even emperors fade. Constantine died in 337 CE. He was baptized and buried. His sons divided what he had built, east and west again, 2 courts, 2 crowns, 2 visions, and beneath the surface division deepened, old tensions stirred, and at the empire's edge, a new storm approached, not from the Senate, not from the provinces, but from beyond the border, people without cities, without walls, a tide waiting to break. The empire will face a trial it cannot ignore. The empire stood, but not unshaken, its borders long and restless, the strength spread thin, its peace worn soft by time. After Constantine's death, his sons took power, not as one, but as many. The empire was shared again, divided among brothers, east and west, 2 courts, 2 visions. They ruled, but they did not always agree. One part looked toward the rising sun, to trade, to wealth, to quiet walls and golden churches. The other looked westward, to older cities, weaker roads, and shadows that crept ever closer. Beyond the empire's edge, another world moved, forests thick with cold, wide plains without walls, people without cities. The Goths had watched Rome for generations. Traders, raiders, wanderers, sometimes allies, sometimes foes. But now, they were fleeing. From the east, a new force had risen. Swift, savage, relentless, the Huns, riders from the steppe, unknown and wild. They struck like lightning and left silence behind. The Goths ran southward, toward the empire, toward its rivers, toward its gates. They asked for shelter, and Rome allowed them in. But welcome turned bitter. The Gothic people were many, hungry, exhausted. Roman officials, greedy and careless, demanded bribes. Food grew scarce. Children were taken as payment. Anger swelled. The Goths had crossed the river as guests. But now, they prepared for war. Rome answered with soldiers. An army marched north, confident, heavy with armor, led by Emperor Valens himself. He would meet the Goths near a quiet town, a place called Adrianople. The day was hot, the fields dry, dust curled into the sky. The Roman lines formed, shields raised, standards lifted. But the Goths had waited well. They struck with force, with speed. From the hills, from the flanks, the Roman legions broke and fell. Emperor Valens was lost, burned in a farmhouse, unrecognized, unburied. Adrianople was not just a battle. It was a sign, a warning. The empire was no longer untouchable. In the east, fear settled like mist. In the west, uncertainty grew. The borders, once firm, now felt thin. And within the empire, questions echoed. Who would lead? Who would stand? Could Rome endure the weight of so many storms? The world was shifting, and the empire felt the ground move beneath it. In the next part, a new emperor will rise, a man of faith, a man of strength. He will bring unity, he will bring laws, but even he cannot stop what comes after. Theodosius and the final divide. We witnessed the last breath of a united Rome. The fields of Adrianople still smoldered. The emperor was gone, the legions shattered, and the eastern throne stood empty. The empire needed order. It needed strength. It needed calm. From Spain came a man named Theodosius, a soldier, a thinker, a believer. He was asked to lead. He accepted. Theodosius came to a broken army, to a restless land, to a people uncertain of their place in the world. But he did not rule with fear. He ruled with patience and faith. He rebuilt what had fallen. He trained new legions. He calmed old borders. And to the Goths he offered peace, not through victory, but through negotiation. They would remain within the empire. They would keep their leaders. And in return, they would fight for Rome, not as strangers, but as soldiers. It was a new kind of alliance, uneasy, but necessary. Theodosius also turned inward. He was a Christian emperor, but not in silence. He declared Christianity the official religion of the empire. Old temples were closed. Pagan rites were ended. Altars that once smoked with offerings now stood cold. Church and state became one. Bishops gained influence. Emperors bowed to doctrine. The gods of old faded into memory, and the cross rose in their place. The empire remained whole barely. East and west, still connected, still Roman, but only for a moment. In the year 394, Theodosius fought his final war, not against barbarians, but against a usurper in the west. He won, and for one last time, the Roman Empire stood united under a single ruler, east and west together. But not for long. In 395 CE, Theodosius died, quietly, in his bed, weary from war, wrapped in faith. He left behind two sons, Arcadius in the east, Honorius in the west. Both were young, both were untested. They would rule separately. The empire once again divided, this time permanently. No more would one emperor rule both halves. No more would the armies march as one. No more would the fate of Rome rest in a single hand. The Eastern Empire looked toward Constantinople, to order, to wealth, to the rising sun. The Western Empire turned toward Rome, to memory, to fragility, to the fading light. And beyond the borders, shadows still gathered. New tribes moved, old enemies watched, and the walls grew thin. Rome had changed before, from kingdom to republic, from republic to empire, from marble to brick, then back again. But now something deeper was shifting, not in buildings, but in belief. A new faith had taken root, quietly at first, in catacombs, in whispers, in signs drawn on stone walls. Now it moved through palaces, through laws, through the hearts of emperors. Christianity had once been outlawed. Now it was official. Now it was everywhere. Temples closed their doors. Statues were taken down. Altars stood quiet beneath gathering dust. The old gods faded. No more sacrifices in public squares. No more festivals for Jupiter or Mars. Instead, hymns echoed through stone churches. Crosses replaced eagles. Clergy replaced augurs. The change was slow, but steady and irreversible. In towns and cities, churches rose. Basilicas stretched toward the sky. Paintings told stories not of myths but of saints. The empire became something new, still Roman in law, still Roman in tongue, but guided now by faith. The emperors led the shift. Constantine made Christianity legal. His sons strengthened it. Then Theodosius declared it the only truth. Paganism was pushed aside. Some resisted, some mourned, but the tide was turning. With faith came power. Bishops grew strong. Their words carried weight in courts and councils. They stood beside generals. They advised emperors. Rome once knelt before the gods of the state. Now it listened to the voice of the church. Doctrines were debated. Councils were called. Creeds were written. The empire had a new spine. But unity in faith did not mean peace. Even within Christianity, divisions appeared. East and West argued, over words, over authority, over truth. One God, one faith, but many voices. Still, the shift was clear. Rome was no longer just an empire of stone and sword. It was becoming something spiritual, something eternal. The identity of Rome had changed. It no longer rested on the Capitol, or the Senate, or the old shrines. It rested now on scripture, on baptism, on belief. The cross had become the new banner, and with it, the soul of an empire began to move, away from the past. But while the spirit of Rome looked upward, its body, especially in the West, grew tired. The next and final part of Chapter 5 will follow that slow unraveling. Two empires now stood, but only one was truly prepared to survive. The long goodbye to a united empire. The East endures, but the West begins to fall. The Roman world had once been whole. One name, one emperor, one beating heart. But now it drifted apart, not with a crash, but like ice splitting slowly across a quiet lake. The year was 395 CE. The Emperor Theodosius was dead. In his place, two sons, Arcadius in the east, Honorius in the west. Two courts, two capitals, two futures. In the east, the empire remained strong. From Constantinople, it looked out across the seas. It traded, it governed, it watched. Walls rose tall, gold moved through markets, faith stood firm. The east would endure, but in the west the light dimmed. Rome still wore its titles, still held its traditions, still spoke of glory, but its roots were loosening. Its legions were fewer, its provinces poorer, its borders thinner. Emperors in the west were young, weak, controlled by generals, ministers, or worse, by fear. The Senate met, but held little power. The people worked, but faced growing hardship. Enemies watched from the forests, from the rivers, from the mountains, and they waited. Inside the empire, loyalty grew uncertain. The armies were no longer truly Roman. They were filled with outsiders, mercenaries, federates, men from beyond the Rhine. They fought for gold, not for glory. And when the gold stopped, so did the loyalty. The West tried to hold on, passed new laws. It raised new taxes, prayed to new saints, but the center could no longer hold. Each region began to look inward. Gaul, Spain, Africa, Britain. They thought not of the empire, but of themselves. Governors acted like kings. Soldiers answered to local lords. Rome's voice, once thunderous, now echoed faintly. The East watched, but did not interfere. It had its own borders to guard, its own cities to protect. And so, the two halves remained connected by name, but not by purpose. They shared history, but no longer destiny. By the end of the 4th century, one truth was clear: the Roman Empire was no longer one. It had split quietly, permanently. The East would survive, adapt, flourish. The West would fall, not all at once, but step by step, stone by stone, century by century. We begin the final chapter of Rome's Western Empire, the invasions, the betrayals, the last emperors, and the night that would descend over the eternal city. The Roman world once stretched from ocean to ocean, from deserts to forests, from mountains to sea. But now the winds had changed, and the borders no longer held. In the east, the empire endured, steady, rich, guarded behind high walls. But in the west, something fragile had taken root, an empire in name, but hollowed from within. The year was 395 CE. The Emperor Theodosius had died, and with him, the last moment of unity. His sons divided the empire. Arcadius ruled the east from Constantinople. Honorius, just a child, ruled the west from Ravenna. He was guarded, sheltered, surrounded by generals and ministers, but not by strength. Rome was no longer ruled from Rome, and Rome was no longer strong. To the north, across the frozen rivers and thick forests, a new king had risen. His name was Alaric. He was a Goth, a former ally of Rome. a former soldier in Roman ranks. Now he marched against it. Alaric knew Rome's weaknesses, its empty treasury, its overworked legions, its cities that had forgotten how to fight. He did not come with rage. He came with demands: land, gold, a place for his people. But the West could offer only promises and delay. Alaric would not wait. His army moved through the Balkans, through Greece, into Italy, toward the ancient capital. The roads were quiet, the towns were small, and the legions were far away. Italy, once the empire's beating heart, felt fear again. Meanwhile, inside the court of the young emperor, voices clashed. Should they negotiate? Should they fight? Should they run? Power no longer rested with emperors, but with generals like Stilicho, a half-barbarian commander who had once served under Theodosius. He gathered what soldiers remained. He prepared to face Alaric. But every movement came too late. The Goths had crossed the Alps. They had entered Roman lands. They stood at the gates. This was not the first time Rome had faced invasion, but this time felt different. The old borders, the limes, once strong and sure, had weakened. Settlements along the Rhine and Danube crumbled. Farmers fled. Cities shrank. The outer provinces no longer looked to Rome for help. They looked to themselves. And beyond the rivers, more tribes stirred. Alaric was only the beginning. We witnessed the fall of the unthinkable. The eternal city, entered, plundered, and humbled. For the first time in 800 years, Rome will fall. The eternal city stood in silence. Its streets once echoed with triumph. Now they waited, not for celebration, but for fate. Rome had not been entered by an enemy in nearly 8 centuries. Not since the days of kings and early republics. Not since memory had become myth. But in the summer of 410 CE, the unthinkable happened. The gates opened. The city fell. Alaric had waited long. He had camped outside Rome. Once, then again, and again. He made demands. For peace, for payment, for a home for his people. But the court in Ravenna, far from the city, hesitated, debated, promised little, gave less. And so, Alaric chose what history would remember. He marched on Rome. The Tiber flowed quietly. The hills stood still. And one night, under soft rain and weary stars, the Visigoths entered the city. Some say slaves opened the gates. Others say the walls were too poorly defended. Either way, the city no longer stood untouched. But this was no firestorm, no wild destruction. The sack was slow, measured, selective. Temples were looted, homes were emptied, gold and silk were taken. But many buildings remained. Many lives were spared. Alaric had no interest in destroying Rome, only in humbling it. Still, the world felt the tremor. Rome, the symbol of order, power, and eternity, had been breached. Citizens wept. Senators fled. The old gods remained silent. Even the Christian bishops, though untouched, spoke in hushed tones. In North Africa, St. Augustine began to write, "The city of God, a defense of faith in a time of collapse." He reminded the people, Rome may fall, but the divine city, the eternal soul, would not. The sack lasted 3 days. Then Alaric left. His army moved south, still seeking land, still denied. Weeks later, Alaric died. Some say from illness, others say from grief. He was buried in secret, in a riverbed. The waters of the Bucento redirected, then returned, to hide him forever. Rome survived. Its walls still stood. Its name still echoed. But something had changed. Not just a city had been broken, but an illusion. The idea that Rome was invincible had ended. We follow the slow retreat, provinces lost, armies scattered, and an empire shrinking year by year, border by border. The empire still breathed, but its heartbeat grew faint. Its limbs pulled away from the center. Its memory stretched thin across distant lands. The West was vanishing, not with a single blow, but through slow unraveling, province by province. stone by stone. In Britain, the legions once marched in rows. Their forts lined the hills. Their walls faced the wild north. But no more. By 410 CE, the Roman troops had withdrawn. The locals, left alone, turned inward, to warlords, to their own gods, to the old ways. The light of Rome faded from the Isles. In Gaul, the land of vineyards and villas, the Franks moved in. So did the Alemanni, and the Burgundians. Some came to raid, others came to stay. Local rulers made quiet deals. Roman law gave way to tribal custom. The eagle standard no longer flew above the courts. Yet the people remained, Roman in habit, but changed in rule. In Hispania, the Suebi carved out a kingdom. The Vandals came next, then passed through. Each step was a step away from empire, each crossing a quiet farewell. Governors became kings, councils became courts. The shape of Rome remained, but its voice had grown faint. In North Africa, one of Rome's richest provinces, grain once flowed from the fields to the heart of the empire. Now new hands grasped it. The Vandals, crossing from Spain, took Carthage in 439 CE. Port, a jewel, a loss that cut deep. They did not merely settle. They built fleets. They sailed the seas. They became pirates of empire's trade. Rome watched and could not answer. The Western army no longer stood as it once had. Few legions remained. They were smaller, scattered, filled with men from distant lands. Goths, Franks, Alans, Huns. They wore Roman armor, but fought for coin, not for Rome. When pay stopped, loyalty vanished. And yet the empire tried to endure, passed new edicts, minted new coins, promised security. But the world had changed. The center could no longer hold the edges. The map of Rome, once solid, had softened, and then cracked. The idea of Rome still lingered, in laws, in letters, in dreams, but the body was fading. Only the East remained strong. Only Constantinople still watched the horizon. A new shadow rises from the East, a force not seeking land, but fear. And the West, already trembling, must now face the storm of the Huns. The winds shifted again, not from the north, not from the west, but from the deep east, across the open plains and rising steppe. A new sound echoed, not Roman marching feet, but hooves, endless hooves, and with them came fear. They were called the Huns. Few had seen them clearly, but many had heard their name. Whispers in markets, stories on the wind. They rode fast, fought without formation, struck without warning, and above them all rode Attila. He was not crowned by senate or tradition. He wore no laurel, held no Roman title, but the world began to bow before him. He ruled not just soldiers, but movement, chaos, terror. The Romans called him Flagellum Dei, the scourge of God. In the east he struck hard. He demanded gold, then more gold. He took cities, left ruins. Even mighty Constantinople trembled. His golden walls braced for the storm. But it was the west that would face him next. By 451 CE, Attila turned his gaze westward. Gaul lay before him, its rivers, its towns, its crumbling Roman strength. He crossed the Rhine, burned cities, scattered defenders, and the West had no choice. They called for help, from Visigoths, from Franks, from whoever still held a sword. Old enemies stood side by side, Rome and the tribes it once called barbarian. Together they faced him. At the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, the two worlds collided. Dust filled the air. Steel rang through twilight. Voices were lost in the wind. And when it ended, Attila had withdrawn. It was not a victory, but it was not a defeat. Rome still stood, barely. The next year, Attila turned again, toward Italy. He crossed the Alps. Cities fled before him. Fields burned behind him. But then, he stopped. Legend says Pope Leo I met him, spoke calmly, promised tribute, or perhaps warned of plague, or famine, or divine wrath. Whatever the words, Attila turned back. Rome was spared, for now. Not long after, he died. In the quiet, in his tent, perhaps from illness, perhaps in sleep. The storm had passed, the whirlwind ended, but Rome was not healed. We return to the slow collapse. The generals hold the power, the emperors fade into shadows, and a boy will soon sit on the throne. Rome's final name before the fall. The storm had passed, but the silence that followed was heavier. Not peace, but pause. Not strength, but exhaustion. The Western Empire still existed. On paper, in law, in memory, but not in power. The throne in Ravenna, once a seat of emperors, had become a shadow. A title passed from one weak figure to another. Puppets, placeholders, names history barely remembered. Real power moved elsewhere, to generals, to guards, to men without noble birth, but with command. Ricimer was one such man, a general, a German by blood, a Roman by office. He never called himself emperor, but no emperor ruled without him. He placed them on the throne. He removed them when they failed, one by one, a quiet game of crowns. He chose Avitus, then replaced him with Majorian, then Libius Severus, then Anthemius. Emperors came and went, but the world slipped further away. Gaul was no longer Rome's. Africa was lost to the Vandals. Britain had faded into myth. Spain fractured. The Alps no longer guarded Italy. Even within the empire, unity crumbled. Taxes went unpaid. Roads fell apart. Soldiers deserted. The people of Rome looked back. Not forward. They remembered better days. Of legions and law. Of roads that led everywhere. Of order. Now they lived in fragments. After Ricimer's death, new generals rose. Orestes was one. Once a Roman ambassador. Now a commander of troops. He took power in 475 CE and placed his own son on the throne. A boy, barely a teenager. His name was Romulus. Romulus, like the first king. Augustulus, a title meaning little Augustus. A name meant to inspire, but it only reminded the world how far Rome had fallen. This was the end, not with war, not with fire, but with the soft fade of names and symbols. The boy sat on the throne, but behind him stood uncertainty. The army no longer trusted Rome. They served men of their own choosing, and one man was about to take everything. Rome breathes its last, not in battle, but in surrender. The boy king will fall, and the Western Roman Empire, after centuries of glory, will come to a quiet end. The year was 476 CE. No war drums sounded. No legions marched. No fire consumed the city. Rome, what was left of it, was quiet, and yet an age was ending. The boy emperor Romulus Augustulus still wore the purple, but only in title, only in name. He lived not in Rome, but in Ravenna, a marsh-bound court, hidden behind fading prestige. He held no power, issued no commands. No armies followed his voice. Power now belonged to another, a soldier, a general, not Roman-born, but Roman-shaped. His name was Odoacer. He led the Federati. Foreign troops settled within the empire. Men who once fought for Rome, now they stood apart from it. Their demands were simple: land, payment, recognition. The empire could offer none. So Odoacer marched on Ravenna. There was no great resistance, no final battle. Orestes, father of the emperor, was captured, then killed. Romulus, young, powerless, was spared, sent away, given a small pension, a quiet villa near Naples. The last emperor of the West, dismissed. Odoacer did not take the throne. He did not call himself Caesar or Augustus. Instead, he sent the imperial regalia, the crown, the purple cloak, the standard, to Constantinople. He told the Eastern emperor, Rome no longer needed two rulers, one empire, one throne, far to the east, and the west would fade. No great cry went out, No monuments were toppled. Most people barely noticed. The roads were still there. The cities still stood. Life continued slower, simpler, poorer. But the idea of Rome, the empire that ruled the world, was gone. Historians would later mark 476 CE as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. But for those alive, it was not a fall. It was a drift, a long sleep after a long reign. And yet, Rome itself did not vanish. The city remained. Its people remained. Its language, its laws, its memory, they lived on, in churches, in courts, in dreams. The East endured. Constantinople would hold the flame for centuries more. But the West, the empire of Caesar and Augustus, of senators and soldiers, of roads and aqueducts, that empire had come to an end. But even as the Western crown fell into silence, the story of Rome was not over. Far to the east, beyond the mountains, beyond the fading borders, a new capital stood. Its streets gleamed with marble. Its walls soared above the sea. And there, the name of Rome still lived, not in Latin, not in senators, but in something transformed. A new empire, a new center. The flame of Rome had dimmed in the west, but in the east, it had not gone out. It was waiting, rising, preparing to shine again. Rome had fallen, but not everywhere. In the east, the empire still lived. His heart no longer beat along the Tiber, but beside the Bosporus. There, in a city of walls and domes, of marble colonnades and golden crosses, the old Roman spirit endured, quietly, steadily, carefully. This place was once called Byzantium. Now it bore a new name, Constantinople, the new Rome, the city of the emperor, the bridge between Europe and Asia, between past and future. After the death of Theodosius I in 395 CE, the empire was divided permanently, west and east, two worlds, two destinies. The west unraveled, the east adapted. Under emperors like Arcadius, Theodosius II, and Anastasius, the Eastern Roman Empire chose preservation over conquest, diplomacy over war, structure over chaos. They strengthened the capital's walls, reinforced the treasury, built churches, and rewrote the laws. Constantinople became a city of splendor. By land, it was guarded. By sea, it was secure. By custom, it was Roman. But its voice had changed. Latin faded. Greek returned. The language of the philosophers, the poets, the marketplace. Still, the laws were Roman. The titles were Roman. The dreams were Roman. Trade flowed through its harbors. Spices from the east. Grain from Egypt. Silks, wines, ivory. The city thrived, a beacon of stability in a world of shifting borders. Its streets echoed with the soft prayers of monks, the quiet rustle of scrolls, the distant clang of copper coins exchanged in markets lit by golden lamps. But peace was not constant. Challenges came often. Enemies pressed in from the north, Goths, Huns, Bulgars. From the east, the rising power of Persia. And within the empire, debates stirred. Theological questions, political tensions, whispers of division. Still, the city held. Still, the empire endured. Emperors rose and fell, some cautious, some bold. Most remembered only faintly, but they carried the flame, not to spread it, but to keep it alive. They repaired what was broken. They reformed the currency. They issued new laws. They maintained the roads. They preserved the archives. They did not conquer new lands, but they did not lose the old ones. By the early 500s, the Eastern Roman Empire, now often called Byzantine, stood quietly strong. Its borders were smaller than the empire of Augustus, but its heart beat steadier, no longer Latin in tongue, but still Roman in mind. A quieter Rome, a different Rome, but Rome nonetheless. And then, A man rose who would try to reclaim the past, not in memory, not in myth, but in action. His name would be known for centuries. A builder, a lawgiver, a dreamer of lost empires. In the age of Justinian, the eastern flame burns bright, and Rome tries to rise again. The city stood tall. Its domes rose into the morning mist. The marble glowed in soft gold, and within its chambers, a new emperor was crowned. His name was Justinian. He did not come from ancient bloodlines. He was not born in a palace. He came from the countryside, a shepherd's son from the Balkan hills. But he carried ambition, like a flame behind his eyes. At his side stood Theodora, not a noblewoman, not a queen by birth, but a former actress, once scorned, now crowned. Together they ruled, with strength, with vision, with unshakable resolve. Justinian dreamed not only of peace, but of restoration. He looked westward, toward the fallen cities of Rome, toward lands lost to Goths, Vandals, and others. He did not see ruin. He saw inheritance. The empire, he believed, could be made whole again. He began at home. He gathered scholars, judges, scribes, and under his order they did what no one had yet done. They organized Roman law. Thousands of scrolls, decrees, and statutes, compiled, clarified, and reformed. The result was the Corpus Juris Civilis, the body of civil law. It would outlive the empire. It would shape kingdoms, courts, and nations. It would become Rome's lasting voice in the world of law. Then came the building. Justinian ordered the construction of a church. Not just any church, but a crown for the Christian world. The Hagia Sophia. Its dome would rise above the city like the sky itself. Light poured through its windows. Mosaics shimmered in gold and blue. Voices echoed softly beneath its arches. A house of God, and a symbol of imperial glory. But Justinian's vision did not stop there. He called upon a general, a man of few words and great deeds. His name was Belisarius. With a fleet and an army, Belisarius sailed west, to reclaim what had been lost. In North Africa, he struck the Vandals. Their kingdom collapsed. The Roman flag returned. In Italy, he battled the Ostrogoths. Siege after siege, city after city. Rome itself changed hands. Again and again, victory came, but at a cost. The wars drained the treasury. Cities were left in ruin. Fields lay empty, walls broken. Fires smoldered where people once lived. And then, a shadow fell across the empire. Plague arrived. It spread through ports and alleys. It moved silently, invisibly. They called it the Plague of Justinian. Killed thousands, then tens of thousands, then millions. The streets emptied, markets closed. Even the palace trembled. Justinian himself fell ill, but he recovered. His empire did not recover as quickly. Still, he pressed on. He reformed taxes, rebuilt walls, strengthened borders. He had reached high and touched greatness, but the weight of war, disease, and distance would leave cracks beneath the surface. When Justinian died in 565 CE, the empire stood larger than it had in centuries, but it was stretched, strained, weary, and in time, much of what he reclaimed would slip away again. But his laws remained, his church remained, his name remained. Justinian, builder of greatness, guardian of Roman memory. The question becomes not what Rome owns, but what it believes. Doctrines divide, emperors argue with bishops, and the soul of New Rome begins to split. The wars quieted. The tools of builders replaced the swords of soldiers. And in the stillness that followed Justinian's reign, the Eastern Empire turned inward, not toward conquest, not toward land, but toward the soul. This was an age of faith and of division. Constantinople had become a city of churches. Crosses rose where columns once stood. Monks copied sacred texts in candlelight, and icons, images of saints and Christ, watched silently from painted walls. Faith shaped life. It shaped law. It shaped the empire. But faith was not simple, and belief did not unite. It divided. Doctrines were debated. Words became lines in the sand. Was Christ fully divine? Fully human? Both? Neither? Councils were called. Bishops met in domes and chambers. Emperors listened, and sometimes they commanded. The emperor was not just ruler. He was seen as God's chosen on earth. He protected the faith. He defined orthodoxy. He punished heresy. And so emperors and patriarchs, priests and princes, walked the same marble halls, sometimes in step, sometimes in conflict. Out of this tension came iconoclasm, a movement, a fire. In the early 700s, emperors like Leo III declared that sacred images, icons, were dangerous, false, idolatrous, and so they ordered them destroyed. Paintings scraped from walls, mosaics broken, statues toppled. Not all agreed. Many resisted. Monks hid their icons in caves and cellars. Some were imprisoned. Some were beaten. Some were killed. The empire, once divided by borders, was now divided by belief. For more than a century, the conflict simmered. One emperor would restore the icons. The next would destroy them again. The people waited and watched and prayed. Meanwhile, in the West, another power grew. The Bishop of Rome, the Pope, claimed spiritual authority beyond borders. And while emperors in Constantinople defined doctrine, popes in Rome did the same, but not always in agreement. The distance widened. East and West, Greek and Latin, emperor and pope, two Christian worlds, drifting slowly apart. By the late 700s, one final break began to form. In the West, a king named Charlemagne rose, and in the year 800 CE, on Christmas Day, the Pope placed a crown on his head. He called him Emperor of the Romans. But the East already had an emperor. A woman, Empress Irene, sat the throne in Constantinople. The East did not recognize the West's new claim. The West ignored the East's protests. Two empires, two emperors, two Romes. What began as a matter of faith had become a matter of sovereignty. What was Rome now? A city? An idea? An empire split by seas? And beliefs? The answers were unclear, but the questions would echo for centuries. Faith turns to defense. Enemies surround the empire, and Constantinople faces storms unlike any it has known before. The winds of change blew harsh and cold, not just within the walls of Constantinople, but outside them, far beyond the marble columns. The empire's borders began to fracture. The earth trembled, and the shadows of invading forces loomed. The Byzantine Empire, though still strong, faced its greatest challenge yet. Enemies from all sides. First, the Arab caliphates. In the mid-600s, the Islamic Empire swept across the Middle East and North Africa. What had once been Roman lands, Egypt, Syria, Palestine, fell into foreign hands. Jerusalem, a holy city for Christians, was captured. The ancient heart of Christianity was lost. And though the Byzantine forces fought back, the empire could not hold everything. But the heart of Byzantium, Constantinople itself, remained. The city, high on its hills, facing the sea, was a fortress, impenetrable, or so it seemed. The Arabs did not stop. In 674 CE, they came again, this time in siege. For years, they surrounded the city's great walls, their ships blocking the harbors. But the Byzantines had something the invaders did not. Greek fire, a secret weapon, a burning liquid that could set ships alight. With it, the Byzantines pushed the invaders back, a fire that burned brighter than the sun itself. The siege failed. Constantinople stood, but the empire was not untouched. Its wealth drained, its borders thinned, and just as one threat faded, another arose, the Bulgars to the north. The Bulgarian Empire, young but fierce, clashed with Byzantium in waves. The Balkans became a battleground. For decades, the Byzantine forces fought to hold their lands. The hills became stained with blood. The people were weary, but they fought, and they resisted. Yet it wasn't just the armies the empire had to fight. It was the weather, too. The early Middle Ages saw plague once again. It swept through towns and villages, killing in silence. Famine followed, and with it, dissent. As resources dwindled, the empire faced political unrest. Provinces rebelled. Emperors fought one another for control. Rival factions filled the city streets. But even in the darkest of times, Constantinople remained, held, survived. Still, the dangers were not over. The threat from the east was never truly extinguished, and the Western world, increasingly distant, took on its own shape. The Holy Roman Empire rose in the west. New kings, new ambitions. In the midst of it all, the Byzantine Empire focused on its borders. Trade, once flowing freely, now slowed. But the empire's heart, its heart of stone and gold, remained resilient. The Byzantines learned, adapted, and the empire, though reduced, still cast a long shadow over the land. But soon, even this long shadow would begin to wane. In the distance, another power would rise, and it would bring with it a storm. We see the transformation of Byzantium. A new power arrives to the east, and the Byzantine Empire begins to change once again. The storms passed, the fires faded, but the world around the empire had changed. The Byzantine Empire was still standing. Its capital still gleamed beside the sea, but it no longer ruled as it once had. Its voice was softer, its reach shorter, its shape new. Gone were the vast western provinces. Gone were the dreams of reconquest. But what remained was something refined, something enduring. Byzantium did not vanish. It evolved. In the east, new enemies appeared. The Rus, from the lands of cold rivers and forests, sailed their long ships down the Dnieper. At first they raided, then they traded. In time they learned from Byzantium, its art, its law, its religion. A quiet influence spread. Icons crossed the rivers, priests followed, and one day in Kiev, a prince would choose to be baptized in the Byzantine faith. To the north, the Bulgars rose again, not as raiders, but as neighbors, sometimes allies, sometimes rivals. Treaties were signed, wars were fought, but slowly the border stabilized. A new balance emerged. Within the empire, change moved quietly. Emperors rose from humble roots. They ruled with care, with strength, with faith. The Macedonian dynasty brought renewal. Under rulers like Basil I, Leo VI, and Constantine VII, the empire knew a time of peace, a time of learning. In monasteries, scribes preserved old texts. Philosophers wrote. Historians recorded. A Byzantine Renaissance, not of marble statues or grand theaters, but of knowledge and faith. Law was revised. Art flourished. Mosaics returned to the churches. Gold and blue, gentle and sacred. The empire was no longer Roman in language. Latin had faded. Now Greek filled the halls, the markets, the schools. But the laws still echoed Rome. The titles still echoed Caesar. The memory still lingered. Byzantium had become something different, but not distant. It was still the heir of Rome. In Constantinople, life moved slowly. Fishermen cast their nets on the Bosporus. Children played beneath the arches. Priests whispered prayers behind silk veils. And high above them all, the great dome of Hagia Sophia caught the first light of every dawn. But even in this time of strength, the world beyond the empire stirred. The West had crowned its own emperors. The Islamic world was strong and vast. New powers emerged. New alliances formed. And deep beneath the calm, fault lines remained. The East and the West, both Christian, no longer spoke with the same voice. One prayed in Latin, one in Greek. One looked to the Pope, the other to the Patriarch. One crowned kings, the other anointed emperors. The empire was not weak, but it was alone, and soon, even this golden moment would begin to fade. We step into the twilight. New enemies appear, old alliances fail, and the last centuries of Byzantium begin to unfold. The sun still rose over the domes of Constantinople. Its light still shimmered on marble streets. Priests still walked the courtyards. Merchants still opened their stalls. But something had changed. The empire, once proud and vast, had begun to bend, not all at once, not with thunder, but slowly, quietly. After the death of Basil II in 1025 CE, the empire was strong, but its strength was fragile, held together by one man's will, one man's command. Without him, cracks began to form, rivals, rebellions, confusion at the top. The empire, once orderly, was now ruled by shifting emperors. Civil wars drained its lifeblood. Gold that once built temples, now paid for mercenaries. Beyond the borders, new threats emerged. To the east, a new force appeared, the Seljuk Turks. They came on horseback, fast, fierce, and faithful to a cause. In 1071, at Manzikert, the Byzantine army met them and fell. The loss shattered the empire's hold on Anatolia, its ancient heartland. Cities burned, villages emptied, the frontier collapsed. The empire turned to the west, to fellow Christians, to the Pope. Help came, but not as expected. The Crusades began. Knights and kings crossed Europe, not for Byzantium, but for Jerusalem. Some passed peacefully, some did not. In 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, the worst happened. The Crusaders, once allies, turned their swords on Constantinople. They stormed the city. They plundered its palaces. They shattered its churches. Gold was melted. Relics were stolen. And for the first time in history, Constantinople fell, not to Persians, not to Arabs, but to fellow Christians. For 57 years, a Latin kingdom ruled the sacred city. The empire was broken, scattered into pieces. But Byzantium was not gone. Not yet. In 1261, the Byzantines reclaimed their capital. They returned to the great halls, but they found them hollow. The city was poorer, its people fewer, the spirit dimmed. The empire lived on, but it was small now, a shadow of its former self. It ruled little more than the city itself. Its lands were few, its armies thin, and all around it, new powers rose. The greatest of them came from the east. The Ottoman Turks. They conquered Anatolia. They pushed north and west. They took city after city, until only Constantinople remained, a jewel alone on the water. In 1453, the end came. The Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, brought cannons, ships, thousands of soldiers. The siege began. The walls shook. The people prayed. For 53 days, the city held. And then, the gate was breached. The empire that had lasted 1,000 years came to an end. But something remained. In its libraries, its laws, its churches, its whispered prayers, Rome lived on, not in armies, not in borders, but in memory. The Romans believed in structure, not just on their roads and buildings, but in their rules. Long ago, on wooden tablets, the 12 tables were written. They were simple, but firm. Laws for land, family, debt, and justice. Later, under emperors, laws grew. They were recorded, organized, clarified. Under Justinian, they became the Corpus Juris Civilis, a code that would survive even after the empire faded. Today, echoes remain, in courtrooms, in contracts, in the idea that law is not just power, but principle. The Romans believed in the Senate, in checks and balances, in the idea that no man should hold total control. Though many tried, words like senator, republic, citizen still echo. They live in the language of parliaments, of congresses, of constitutions. Rome is gone, but its laws still speak. Walk down a city street, you'll see Rome, the arches, the domes, the columns of stone. Rome built with purpose. Strong, straight, lasting. They made roads thousands of miles, all leading always to Rome. They built aqueducts, stone bridges that carried water through the sky. Clean, quiet, ingenious. They mastered concrete. It held. It endured. Temples, forums, baths. The Colosseum, built with arches and might, still stands. Their secrets spread to cathedrals, capitals, and courthouses. In Paris, in London, in Washington, D.C., Rome's bricks may crack, but their designs endure. The Romans spoke Latin, not the Latin of scholars, but the Latin of soldiers and merchants. Clear, simple, firm. It did not fade. It changed. Latin became French, became Spanish, became Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. It whispered through generations. In monasteries, in libraries, in schools. Even today it lingers in science, in law, in medicine, etc. Status quo, versus, even our alphabet, from A to Z, comes through Roman hands. Their voices faded, but their words remained. Rome once feared Christianity. It jailed believers, fed them to lions. But over time, it changed. Emperors converted. Temples gave way to churches. The cross rose where eagles once stood. By the time the empire fell, Rome had become Christian, and Christianity had become Roman. The church took Roman titles, pontiff, diocese, basilica. It followed Roman roads. It used Roman law. It echoed Roman order. In the Vatican's marble halls, the Roman spirit still lingers, in symbols, in ceremony, in silence. Rome fell, but its name lived on. In the East, Byzantium still called itself Roman for 1,000 years. In the West, the Holy Roman Empire rose. Kings crowned themselves with old Roman pride. They dreamed of empire, of order, of legacy. In the Renaissance, artists and thinkers looked backward, to columns, to Cicero, to Caesar. Rome became a guide once more. Even revolutions, French, American, borrowed from Roman ideals, not to recreate the empire, but to reclaim its purpose. Rome never truly died. It became memory, and memory became inspiration. Rome fell. Its armies vanished. Its emperors turned to dust. But the story did not end. It became something softer, something quieter, something that lived not in conquest, but in memory. In the heart of Rome, the Colosseum still stands, the stones chipped by time, its walls open to the sky, but still, it stands. Once it held 50,000 voices, cheering, roaring, rising. Now it holds silence, the silence of centuries. Grass grows through its cracks. Shadows move across its arches. Tourists walk where gladiators once stood. It is no longer a theater of blood. It is a theater of remembrance. Elsewhere in the city, other shapes remain. The Pantheon with its perfect dome. The Forum with its broken columns. The roads still paved, still straight, still pointing home. Rome, the city, became Rome, the symbol, not of empire, but of endurance. And the stories? They spread. In old books, in paintings, in quiet voices around the fire. Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Augustus turning peace into power. Nero watching flames. Constantine painting crosses on shields. The Senate debating. The legions marching. The empire rising, then falling. These stories, retold, rewritten, reshaped, found their way into poems and plays, legends and lullabies. Writers across the centuries looked to Rome, not just for history, but for meaning. Shakespeare gave speeches to Caesar. Dante walked through a Roman afterlife. Edward Gibbon wrote of decline, not to mourn, but to understand. Why did it fall? What held it together? Could its fate be repeated? Even today, historians study the rise and fall of Rome as a mirror, as a warning, as a lesson whispered from stone. In the modern age, the Roman story became film. Silver screens brought emperors to life. Columns rose in widescreen. Togas fluttered beneath painted skies. Audiences watched gladiators fight, chariots race, senators plot. But beneath the drama, a quiet question lingered. What made Rome feel eternal? Was it the buildings, the battles, the borders, or was it something else? Perhaps it was the shape of the story. A rise, a golden peak, and then a fall. A story of greatness and of change. That shape became mythic. It echoed through the stories of other empires. Napoleon's France, Victoria's Britain, even in whispers of modern power. All feared the same thing, to rise like Rome and to fall like Rome. Even the city itself remembers. Rome today is filled with echoes. Beneath the cafes, beneath the traffic, beneath the stones, layers of history wait in silence. Archaeologists dig not for treasure, but for memory. A wall, a coin, a fragment of mosaic, each a whisper from another age. Even the Latin inscriptions remain, carved into stone, still legible, still proud. But perhaps Rome's deepest memory is not in ruins, not in statues, not in books. It is in the way we think, in the weight we give to law, to structure, to justice, to citizenship. It is in the quiet respect for roads that connect us, for rituals that bind us, for stories that outlast us. Rome became a model and a myth. In classrooms across the world, children learn its names: Caesar, Augustus, Trajan, Hadrian, Constantine, not as gods, not as conquerors, but as pieces of a long, strange human story. A story of ambition and vision, of flaws and hope, of what we build and what we leave behind. Rome became a warning and an invitation to build with care, to lead with wisdom, to remember that even the greatest powers can fall, but also that their ideas can rise again. As you drift toward sleep, imagine walking the Roman roads, long and straight under an open sky. The sun is soft, the stones warm, the wind quiet, columns rise in the distance. The voice of the past echoes gently, not loud, not urgent, just steady, enduring, Roman. Rome is quiet now, not the empire, but the idea. It doesn't ride in legions anymore. It doesn't raise marble temples or thunder across deserts. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it, in the quiet shuffle of city streets, in the language of law, in the rhythm of calendars, coins, and customs. Rome is still here. Walk through any modern city, you'll pass Rome without even knowing it. A courthouse with white columns, a public square framed by arches, a government building with a dome, built to echo the Pantheon. These shapes are not accidents. They are memories in stone, from London to Paris, from Berlin to Washington, D.C. Even in capitals far from Europe, the influence remains, not because of conquest, but because of admiration, because Rome worked, and parts of it still do. The alphabet we write with, the same one you're reading now, came from Roman hands. Our months, named after their gods and emperors. January, from Janus. March, from Mars. July for Julius. August for Augustus. The very way we tell time, our weeks, our days, our years, flows from a Roman rhythm. Look to the law. Modern legal systems, from Europe to the Americas, are filled with Roman concepts, contracts, inheritance, citizenship, property, even the idea of a written code. A clear public list of laws was born on Roman tablets. Over 2,000 years ago, Latin phrases remain in courtrooms: habeas corpus, subpoena, etc. These are not relics. They are living words, carried forward, still used, still understood. In politics, Rome is a silent advisor. The idea of a republic, a government of elected leaders, echoes the Roman model. The Senate, the balance of powers, the role of citizens, all inspired by the Roman world. When the founders of the United States debated their constitution, They looked to Rome. They studied Cicero. They spoke of consuls and tyrants, of liberty and duty. And though they lived in a different age, they understood a lesson Rome had taught, that power must be balanced, that ambition must be watched, that freedom must be earned and protected. Even in art and imagination, Rome survives. Painters still paint its ruins. Directors still film its battles. Writers still retell its rise and fall. The story of Rome has become more than history. It has become a pattern, a way we measure greatness, a way we wonder about our own time. We ask, are we Rome? Will we fall like they did? Not out of fear, but out of reflection. Because Rome was human, ambitious, flawed, brilliant, and fragile. In science, the Roman legacy is quieter, but present. In engineering, in city planning, in systems designed to last, their aqueducts still function. Their roads are still walked. Their methods copied and admired. They did not invent everything, but they refined, they organized, they scaled, and in doing so, they set a template for those who followed. Even in faith, Rome left its mark. The Vatican, heart of the Catholic Church, stands where emperors once walked. The Pope wears Roman titles. The Church uses Roman law. Christianity spread on Roman roads, in Roman towns, through Roman words. A faith once persecuted in Rome became shaped by it, and in many ways, Rome became shaped by faith. In the quiet corners of our modern lives, Rome is there too, in public baths and heated floors, in concrete and road signs, in town councils and city maps. Its presence is subtle, not loud, not boastful, just steady, like a foundation. And yet, for all it left us, Rome also left questions. What makes a society endure? What causes it to collapse? What happens when power grows too large? Or when ambition outpaces wisdom? These questions are not Roman alone, but Rome asks them best, because Rome tried everything: kingdom, republic, empire, faith, war, peace, glory, decline. It lived them all, and in doing so, it became a mirror for all civilizations, all peoples, all dreams of greatness. And so Rome lives on, not as an empire, not as a city, but as a memory, etched into buildings, echoed in language, preserved in thought. You may never walk its roads, you may never see its ruins, but you live with its legacy, in the words you speak, in the laws you follow, in the freedoms you defend. Rome is not a chapter of history, it is part of the present, and perhaps part of the future too. And now, dear listener, the story ends, not with a fall, but with a whisper. You have walked through centuries, through myth and war and wonder, and as you drift into sleep, know that Rome still walks with you,